Richard, welcome to the Wealthy Wellthy podcast.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And we met at our mutual friend Charles's mastermind called Flow. And
Absolutely, yeah.
Charles
It's a
is
great,
just the
great
super
mastermind.
connector. I know the super connector. So I can't tell you the number of amazing people and conversations I've had as a result of Charles. For everybody listening, I've referred to Charles Bird probably many times in my podcast because a lot of these podcasts are a result of his referral. Anyway, how many introductions has Charles made for you?
Quite a lot. So I think we're, like 10 or 15 now. And then I went through his other program, his Your JV program about how to become a super connector. And so we started that in October. And since October, we have built, oh man, 36 referral partners in our company. And I've got, four strategic partnerships going, and we got a couple embedded partnerships going. And I'm getting on podcasts like this. It's been a pretty phenomenal system to go through. So, our both of us are probably unashamed and unabashed fans of Charles Bird's and his programs.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, big shout out. And for everybody listening, I mean, I got to know you a little bit, but we're going to get into what you do, why you do it, how you do it. And there's going to be so many nuggets and even side conversations. For everybody listening, Richard and I had before we hit the record button, we were just really getting into philosophical and good stuff. I'm like, oh my God, we should be recording this. This is some really good stuff that I think anybody would want to listen to. But before we get there, I always like to start with a little backstory. Like you and I met professionally. We can talk business. We're talking a little AI. We're taking some other stuff, but I don't really know you. Who is Richard? Like, how did you grow up? What's some backstory that brought us to where we're sitting down sharing wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you the short version of a long story. So I got started in business when I was 9 years old because I think it was nine, might have been 10. But my dad comes home at one point with a copy of the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which I know is a common story for a lot of people. One of his friends at work had given it to him, and he was like, I think your son would like this because it was about a boy that was my age, right? That's where the Rich Dad Poor Dad series starts. And he gave me that book and it had a little note on it from his friend that said, Hey, I think you'd like this book. And I sat down and I read that book. I read the whole book in the first, in one like with a flashlight under my sheets at 9 years old. And I read it like six times in the first week, and I was like, this business thing is really cool. And that was like my first introduction. And at 13, I convinced my dad to give me a loan for $50 because I was broke. I don't have a lot of money at 13 to go to the big box store and buy candy. Like the big candy bars you couldn't get at school, like the big, Snickers bars and other things. And I filled my backpack up with all this stuff. And I started selling them on campus. And I was doing really well for that and got my first lessons in business because I paid my dad back the $50 I owed him, and then I went and bought inventory, so I had more inventory to sell, and I had $0 in my bank account, and I was like, I don't understand what just happened. And I learned the difference between profit and revenue and debt and all those things, and I actually had to go, and they didn't have the internet readily available at that point, so I went to Barnes and Noble and got a book on what profit and revenue was and sat and read it in the back, when they used to have all the couches there. And that went really well for about 6 weeks before the powers that be came and shut me down because apparently you can't run a business on campus without a business license, and you can't have a business license at 13. So I tell people I got my first government shutdown at 13 years old after I made about 1,500 bucks. That was my first sort of foray into realizing that like there's something to this world of business that you can create. You can create money by offering value to people. And, it was a really simple value then. It was just, providing access to candy they couldn't get on campus, but it made money. And that was how I learned to do that. And then, I graduated high school and went on to a Bible college and got a degree in preaching because I wanted to learn how to read the scriptures in original Greek and Hebrew and got to do that with some really incredible professors at a Bible college. And then left there and I paid my way through college as a professional photographer. So it was a small business kind of thing and did weddings and portraits and was the campus photographer, got paid for all of that. And so I graduated school with no debt as a result of, small business type thing, and then got out of that and got into small marketing firm. So like local business marketing. And this is at the time I was like starting mobile websites were a thing that were starting to come on the scene. I was like, if you didn't have a mobile website, it was an important thing. And like, getting businesses to use QR codes and other things like that. And I ran that for a couple of years, did a really bad job of it, running it as a business because I was not a business owner. I was just what would you call it? I was using the skills I had to get people good results, but I didn't know how to do marketing or like for myself. And I didn't know how to run a company. And I didn't know how to both deliver and like, I didn't know any of the business sides. I just know how to deliver on the marketing stuff. So I was getting good results for my clients and then, feast and famine, starving and doing all this, the early entrepreneur failure stuff. And eventually wound up shutting that all down to get a job as a director of marketing. And I told you that story a little bit. I wrote a book to get into a director of marketing position. And what I was trying to do was like I wanted to get a big enough company that the I would be sitting around the table with people that knew how to run companies, right? So like I wanted to be on the C-suite, like director level or above, and then being able to talk to like the president and the CEO and the board of directors so I could learn the business parts of running a business and managed to get that position, beat out 250 other applicants because I wrote a book and sent it into the president and CEO, and they hired me as a result of doing that. There's a whole story there which you can get into if you're interested in what we did with that. But I spent the next 2 years, and every single week I got to sit down with the president of the company because I was in charge of a $25,000 a month marketing budget. We 10x the lead flow for that company. We made them almost $50 million in sales over my 18-month tenure there. And every week I could sit down with the president, and one of the other meetings was with the board of directors, and the board of directors, the chair was from Microsoft, and he sat on the board for 12 different companies that he owned. And so I got to coach with both of them every week, and I spent as much time as I could extracting everything from like what it took to actually run a company, and learned all sorts of things like, you know, why we do payroll the way that we do and how you hire and how you fire and just like all these different aspects of business. So like I used it, like I got paid really well to do what I was doing, but like what I wasn't actually interested in the paycheck. I was interested in the coaching I could get in the real world spot while someone paid me to do what I was good at, which was the marketing side. And then I quit and I gave them a 3 month, like it wasn't a like I'm quitting and I'm leaving you high and dry kind of thing. I was like, hey, I'm going to go back and start my own business. So I'm going to give you a 3 month notice so we can hire and train my replacement and put someone in for here and I can go back to running my own business and, thank you for all the coaching kind of thing. So we did all of that. And then I went back and started my coaching company where what I was doing essentially was instructional design. So we were taking experts, people like you or people like Matt or people like Charles that we know and helping them develop their courses and their programs and their masterminds. In my first one, we took his course, which had about a 10% completion rate, and rewrote it and got it up to an 86% completion rate from his students. And it was actually a real estate investing course, which is I know something you're really good at. And so we took his by essentially by narrowing it down to like how to close your first deal in 60 days. And his completion rate went up to about 86%, and his success rate went over 90%. So like 90% of his students would close their first deal in 60 days. And he went from making about $1,200 a month on his program to making $250,000 that next year in his course and training stuff. And we did a couple other things. Helped a guy do $500,000 on his webinar. We would do everything. So like help them develop their courses, their programs, their webinars, all the tech that goes into the back end of all of that. And then the last part of our process, so like the process that I developed, I called the digital alchemy formula. And it was like how to go from I have an expertise in something to I have an entire business built around that expertise. And the last part of that alchemy formula was the letter Y was your message everywhere. And your message everywhere was a playbook for building a podcast and using the podcast to build all of your content marketing and your social media. And so it would turn into your YouTube videos, and it would turn into your audio podcast, and it would turn into all your social media posts. It would turn into your newsletter and your blog and all this stuff. It was a huge playbook. And I would give it to my clients to be like, okay, you're at this point now, go do these things. And I would hand it to them. And some 25% of my clients, which I didn't have a lot, right? I could only, because of the level of work I was doing, and I was doing it all by myself, I could have like one or two clients at a time, right? And then that was like 40, 60 hours a week of work working with those two clients to build everything in their business. But roughly 25% of my clients would take that playbook and implement it. And then all the ones who did all have $1 million businesses, and the ones who didn't don't. And so I was struggling with what is the reason why this is happening. And so I started my own podcast and followed the playbook. And that podcast is called The Hero Show. And I started that in 2017 or 2015. It was a long time ago. And I recorded the first 10 episodes of that with people and then started following the playbook through it. And I got through episode 3 on the playbook before I realized why my clients weren't doing the work. And I was like, oh, it's a lot of work. That's why. And the clients who were doing it had teams, right? And so they would take the playbook and hand it to their teams, and their teams would implement on it. And I was like, light bulb, they need a done for you version of this service. And that's where Push Button Podcast was born. I spent the next, embarrassingly, I spent 2 years sitting on that and letting my podcast language and not solving that problem until I went to a mastermind similar to like our Flow Mastermind. And the proprietor of that mastermind pulls me aside and he goes, you're your biggest problem. When you get home, hire someone to do these things in this order. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't have the money for that. I had this vacillated on it for another 3 months because I was still learning how to be a business owner myself. And then eventually hired someone, and we spent the next year developing the systems and processes to run the podcast for our own show, the Hero Show. And when we went back to the mastermind the next year, I showed them what we built. Everyone in the room was like, "Can we buy that from you as a service?" And that was another light bulb moment for me. And I was like, "Oh, we actually built the done for you service." And that became Push Button Podcast. That was about 5 years ago now. And now we serve. And what I realized when we did that is now I didn't need to, I could take just that service and work with the businesses who already had their offers in place, who already had their courses or already had their service provision or already, or even small businesses who like, lawyers and doctors and consultants who already had an offer that was working in the marketplace. And we could help them build the brand portion and the content marketing portion and the referral networking portion that comes from running a podcast. And just to do focus on that. And we've scaled up. We have about 40 shows under management now, and our goal is to get to 200 shows under management over the next couple of years. And that's sort of how we got to where we are. And then secondary to all of that, but in 2017, my wife and I decided it'd be a good idea to move onto the road in an RV and travel. And so we've been traveling full time for the last 7 years when we've taken 4 kids, across 48 states, and we've been all over the United States with them. And we travel with 2 ferrets and a cat at the moment. We had a dog who passed away, last year. And our fourth child was actually born on the road in Texas. So she's never actually lived in we call what our traveling world we call sticks and bricks homes. And yeah, so I'm actually in the back bedroom of my RV right now. This is our studio that I built in here. And so we travel, and I've got a staff of, I think, 12 right now. And it goes up and down depending on our seasons, but we've had as many as 18 people that we run the company with. And yeah, so that's sort of me. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a traveler, and we run a podcasting company.
A great story. Wow, thanks for sharing that. And what a beautiful journey. So I'm going to take us back to where we started. I mean, first of all, for your dad to give you this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is probably one of the first books for anybody I know that's built a sizable amount of wealth, especially through real estate. But just, the cash flow quadrant, for example, from
Yeah.
Kiyosaki, which you're basically explaining, going through that whole quadrant. But what about your dad? That was he just that way, like kind of inspiring you to?
So my dad he's one of the greatest people I know. I love him to death, but he's an employee. He's an E-quadrant
Mm,
guy, and he is incredibly good, like at what he does or what he did. He's retired now, but he was one of the only people in the world to do the kind of work that he did. I mean, he actually got to work on he got to work on one of the Challenger spacecraft, one of the ones that didn't blow up, by the way. And he worked on the Voyager shuttle, like the one that's actually out in space sending data back to us. He worked on that. He worked on the Alpha space-based laser system that is, the missile defense system that is, most likely defending the United States right now from, missile attacks. It's in space. And he worked on Imthel and Alpha and other laser systems and like had a, top secret government clearance and like couldn't always tell me what he was working on at work kind of thing. So highly paid employee, did really well for himself and wasn't really into business. And for the longest time, when I was starting and getting into business stuff, we could be like, I don't understand what you do or why you're doing it. And he was disappointed when I chose Bible college because, I wasn't going to go to college because, Robert Kiyosaki was my mentor at the time. I read every book he ever had. And he was like, only go to college if you have a specific skill that you're looking to get that you can't get anywhere else. And he's like, otherwise, you don't probably need it for business. And I wanted to be in business really bad. But my dad was like, no, like a requirement of, growing up in my house is you will go to college. He didn't tell me which college I had to go to. So I was like, if I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go and get something that I can't get anywhere else. And that's why I was like, I want to learn how to read the Bible in Greek and Hebrew. So I went to Bible college and he was like, that's not what I meant. I meant go to a STEM college.
right. Well, you're specific, so
Yeah. And I was like, but you weren't specific. So I went to
right.
Bible college.
Right.
And yeah, and then, it was a couple of years ago now, but I got a card from my dad. He was like, I still don't understand all the things you do, but he's like, I'm really proud of you and the work that you've done.
Yeah, I
Um,
bet. That's
and
great.
and so I was probably 15 years old when I was really starting to talk to my dad a lot about what I wanted to do with business. And I remember really specifically a drive we had back home from school one day where I was talking about like my dream and my vision. Like, it's a really, really common thing for entrepreneurs to do vision building and, dream building stuff. Like I was running through some of those exercises myself and just like onboarding them off of my dad. And my dad responded with, don't get your hopes up. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, and I was like, oh, one of the things that Robert Kiyosaki talks about, and if you read enough books, you see a lot of really successful people say this, is you have to be selective about who your mentors are, right? And one of the things I realized is like my dad can be an incredible mentor in a lot of areas, right? Like in parenting and in my ability to learn and in a lot of the skills that I have in my life are from him. And, I look up to him highly for a lot of those things. But I realized in the business category, I couldn't look up to him as a mentor because that wasn't his world. And it's never going to be. And so I was like, I need to separate that. And I need to have mentors in the business space. And I actually went and found, I got my first mentor in an MLM program, actually, because I was just trying to find people who were doing business. And I found a really successful gentleman who was doing several $1 million a year in sales in an MLM program and started going through leadership training with him before I was even 18 years old. And had that realization. And I realized a couple of things. And so now, and by the time I was 18, I was like, I have my mom and my dad who are incredible mentors in my life for like how to run a life and how to be a good human being in society and that kind of stuff. And then I had a spiritual mentor. It was at school actually through a Christian youth program that really helped me sort of put everything on the right stuff for my path there. And I had a business mentor. And that was really helpful for me learning that. But I don't know if that answers the question. But yeah, my dad was
Yeah,
not a business guy, but one of his friends at work was like, your son's kind of, he's one of those weird entrepreneurial style kids who's like trying to sell, I was like the kid who was going around the neighborhood and trying to sell my, Pokemon cards to my friends and, to the neighbors and whatnot. And he was like, he should read this book. And so my dad brought it home for me because, he agreed, right? I was one of those weird kids.
I love it. And how'd you do in school?
I did as well as my dad required me to. So we went to a really, like in high school, went to a really big high school. We had 4,200 students in it. So it was, we were lost in a sea of people. It's actually part of the reason I chose a small Bible college to go to for college because I didn't want to be a number anymore. And, I was like, I actually had a number on campus and I mean, it was in the thousands. But my group of people, like that we hung out with at lunch all through high school was, the valedictorian and salutatorian. And like my group of friends, the average GPA was 4.2 or 4.3. And then there was my GPA. My GPA was 3.6. And it wasn't because I wasn't as good as they were. It was because we were at an advanced school that had a lot of college preparatory classes, and the college preparatory classes gave you an entire course syllabus at the beginning. And they were like, here's everything we're going to do over the next 6 months, and here's what they're worth to your grade. And my dad's rule was you have to get at least a B or we're going to have problems. And so it was like, in my English class, they'd be like, here's all the things that you're going to do this semester. And I was like, so that project there is worth 80% of my grade. So if I ace that, I've got my B in the
Go
books,
back,
and then all
right?
I need to do is like pass a couple of the tests, and I've got like an A, B plus, A minus, and I'm good. And then I could spend the rest of my time doing the things that I wanted to do, which was, like, when we did the Ren Festival on campus, and they could select your booths and whatnot. Everyone else is like, they want to run the falconry booth or the blacksmithing booth, and I was like, I want to run the water booth so I can make money. And, and so like I was always doing that kind of stuff, and my friends always thought I was crazy because they were like, you're smarter than all of us and you get the worst grades of all of us and you also do the least amount of work and yet you pass everything. And I was like, that's because they told us what the system was. So I rigged the system in my favor. And, I would do maybe 4 hours a week of schoolwork outside of school. And, my friends who were the valedictorian and salutatorian, in order to get those 4.3 GPAs, they're working, their entire school career and, 60 hours of work on top of that, plus all their extracurriculars. And I was like trying to run businesses and had a couple of jobs and was making money and, doing those kind of things. And I think in one of my yearbooks, I can't remember which one, there's a little things, they say like what's like most likely, and like under mine, it was like most likely to be a millionaire, which I'm not
Oh,
there yet, but we
that's a great
we
one.
are, yeah, but Push Button Podcast
Yeah.
is we're gonna cross $1 million in revenue probably in the next couple of months. And that's lifetime revenue for the company, but eventually we'll get that to yearly revenue and then beyond, hopefully. So
Well done. Yeah, I mean, just listening to your story, I mean, I could just ask questions forever. But clearly, from a young age, you saw the world through a different lens and you were dancing to a different beat and just did your thing. And that's started 9 years old, probably pre-9 and up to the same day, is that your curiosity. And there's just, for entrepreneurship, I've been around for a long time and I found that those that succeed in business and entrepreneurship really have what you have. And it's that love of curiosity, like ask,
yeah,
it's not even necessarily conscious, but seeing things and learning them like, hey, I want to learn XYZ, so I'm going to learn it. And then, but it's not just about academia and learning things, it's learning things because there's a curiosity, like, I wonder why that works or how it works, or could I do something with this? And then you go apply it and play with it. And then it's business becomes almost playful because it's the playground for experimenting with
the game.
something that's been very interesting to learn. And so, like those that really love entrepreneurship and business and succeed at it, I found have a similar quality about them, that entrepreneurship is just a playground for experimentation of, hey, let's see if this works, and want to make money and all the different things, of course. But I found it's very different than those that jump into this arena just to make money, or just because they've been told that the sexy thing these days is to be an entrepreneur and not to work for the man, or whatever, cultural narrative is out there. But yeah, you just have a curiosity, and that curiosity leads to the next thing, and next thing is like, now I think I found my groove. Like my best use value of everything I've acquired over all these decades now is to synthesize and fuse that into podcasts, because this podcasting, I can help people in all these different categories. I can share some of my wisdom through my own podcast. I can teach others about business through podcasting. I can help other people be better at business through podcasts. So it's like this one mechanism as a business is allowing you to really offer the highest and best use, most value of Richard, because of all these, years of learning and
Yeah.
applying into one thing.
Yeah, I know one of the things I like, the curiosity aspect is really interesting. So there's a couple of things I like to make the point for. So when I was younger as an entrepreneur, I used to think, and this was a naive thought, that anybody could be an entrepreneur, right? Very similar to like if you ever watch Ratatouille, anyone can be a chef. And the thought that I had was that anyone was cut out to be a chef or like to be an entrepreneur. And the message of Ratatouille is not that anyone should be a chef, it's that a great chef can come from anywhere, right? And so my more mature thought about it is that a great entrepreneur can come from anywhere. But most people aren't cut out for this world because it's not a world for the faint of heart. All right. It's a roller coaster and you're never doing the same thing, twice. And it's scary. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you have no money and sometimes you're making a lot of money. And sometimes, it's just a different world. Right. And you don't have stuff planned out for you. You've got to blaze the trail yourself pretty much all the time. And it's a hard world. I don't like to just romanticize it for people to realize like, no, entrepreneurship, sure, it's a great, culturally, you said the cultural narrative, it's sexy being an entrepreneur. And that's true, right? It does give us a lot of freedom and a lot of power and a lot of things that you don't have in the other quadrants, right? The E quadrant, sometimes even the S quadrant. But the reality is it's hard. But it's also like for those of us who have the bug, like we can't do anything else. Like this is the only option because I make a terrible employee. And to your point about being curious, I call it skill collection. If I had an addiction, my addiction would be collecting new skills. Collecting skills the way other people collect stamps or coins. And over the last 7 years, I could probably just give you a quick recount of things I've picked up. Like I learned plumbing and I learned fiberglass repair and I learned carpentry and I learned how to juggle and I learned black letter calligraphy. I went through a couple of drawing classes, learned how to draw. I learned how to play the piano. And that's like outside of business. If we get into the business world, we've learned everything from like how to build AI agents and doing like app development and database design, just like all sorts of skills that come together. And one of the things that I find really interesting, if you've ever read a book, the guy who read Dilbert, Scott Adams, he has got a book called How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. And his premise in that book is this idea of skill stacking. And skill stacking is, if you can get yourself to be world class in one skill is really, really hard, right? Like, if you want to beat Michael Phelps at swimming, like good luck, right? So to get into that level of anything is really hard to do. But if you take the Venn diagram of two different skills and you get to 80% proficiency in two different skills, where those two skills come together, it's really easy to get to world class level. And it gets even easier if you start expanding that Venn diagram. Now you have three skills that you get to 80% in. That Venn diagram, you're almost guaranteed to be in the top 1% of people in the world who have that blend of skills. And so what entrepreneurs are really good at is we're really good at doing that skill stacking, where we take that curiosity that you were talking about and developing skills and then figuring out which ones tie together and turn us into something that nobody can compete with, right? And so, your point to like push button podcasts for me, that comes from like I went through college and went to a Bible college and learned how to be a preacher, right? And so I learned the incredible power of storytelling, right? Not just as a persuasive tool that humanity uses, but one of my contentions is that if you actually read the creation story in the Bible, is God spoke the world and the universe into existence, let there be light and all of that, right? But he didn't do that with humanity. With humanity, he formed us out of the dust in the ground, right, with his hands, and then he breathed life into us. And so my question has always been, what is that breath of life? What is that spark of divinity that humans have, the thing that makes us like God in kind? And what I believe that is, it's our ability to tell stories because storytelling, like the next chapter in Genesis, the first thing that God has Adam do in that story is to name all the animals, right? To order chaos, right? That's what we use language for. We use language to order chaos. That's what storytelling is. It is an ordering of chaos. And so we use our ability to tell stories to create our futures and to create the next world, right? To create both imaginary worlds, and then our imaginary worlds are what become reality as we turn imagination to technology and technology into reality. So storytelling is like at its core, it's the thing that makes us human. It's that spark of divinity that makes us who we are. And so storytelling then is not just a thing that like we do at Push Button Podcasts. It's like we are working on helping businesses and helping nonprofits and helping individuals leverage their story, wield their story to actually create the future that they want to create. I mean, we've sort of broken it down systematically for people, but that comes from like, I've got hitting the microphone, the world of learning about storytelling and the power there, and like learning behind, all the systems and stuff that go into running a business and the databases and the automations and the stuff, like learning about how to run a company and how to build teams and how to hire people and how to build a culture. And like you start putting all those things together, and that skill stack, that Venn diagram is where like you find your business. So, that's sort of how I ended up here.
Beautifully said. And that's just it. I mean, that's it, is that you can't outsource. Like you do have to skill set if you're going to succeed at entrepreneurship. And then you learn and then you can outsource. But it's a difference, like you said, even what you do at Push Button Podcast is you turn the expert and their expertise into a business. And, I don't think a lot of people understand that when they leave the E. And what we're referring to is Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant, meaning there's four quadrants. There's the S, there's the E quadrant, which is the employee quadrant. There's the S quadrant, where a lot of people leave their W-2 day job to move to be self-employed, thinking that is entrepreneurship and that is business. And without understanding that, no, really what the S category is an expertise that you can go out on your own. So you can work on at a law firm and be an employee, but your expertise is law. Then you leave the law firm and you become self-employed. And basically, you're the same expertise, but you're just kind of doing the same job that you were without even the resources that you might have had as an employee. Where the difference is what you're talking about is to really move to the next quadrant, which is the B quadrant, means it's now I have to build a business around this expertise. And this business is this whole new set of knowledge and skills. It's a domain of knowledge. It comes with all these pieces I don't understand, these fundamentals, these I have to build this machine, blah, blah, blah. And it's really the separator that's self-employed to business. And what you're talking about, I think, is to summarize this, is what you said at the beginning with Push Button is that's what we're doing. We're helping self-employed people, experts, build a business around the expertise, really using this primary model called podcast, but we help with marketing, we help with storytelling, we help with probably some business management and SOPs and other types of systems. And we can really help. We're not just about podcast production, we're really about how do we help this self-employed expert that has a great story and that has a really top level skill set and turn that
Yeah.
into a business so that they can reach more people.
Yeah, so our primary target is a lot of the self-employed people, but we also do work with B quadrant businesses as well. We also work with nonprofits, and we're also doing some stuff with politics too, because the system actually works for any type of business. But the self-employed people, especially if they're, they're high net worth, they're doing well, they're a good fit for us because they don't have the team and the resources generally to do all the work that we'll do. And so we've built all of the systems and processes and the SOPs, and like we're actually in the process now of developing all of our processes into an app so that like I don't know, it's really clean and really fast for them to get the result that they want to get from, using their story and building a podcast. And there's so many cool benefits that come from running a podcast. Everything from being able to have conversations like this to creating your content that you need for your business to building a referral network. And you can take your podcast and turn them into books. That's what we were talking about before we got on, is like a process that I've gone through to take We can take about between 12 and 20 podcast episodes with someone and write an entire book, like ghost write a book out of your podcast episodes. So you can end up with a book as a result of what the work that you're doing. So we just find podcasts to be an incredibly high leverage activity for anyone. And the part of the reason it's high leverage is because the only thing that requires you is just the part where you need your face and voice, the actual recording part. And you can hire a team like Push Button Podcast. And we're not the only ones who are out here doing, podcast production, the kind of stuff that we're doing, but you can get that leverage by hiring someone or hiring people on your own team or whatever it is. And if you know what to do, it's a very high leveraged activity.
Yeah, what I hear from you, Richard, though, is the distinction, meaning it distinguishes you from others. And, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just kind of pulling this out of our conversation. But, what I'm always listening for with entrepreneurship is what's distinct, what's different, what stands out. And, for those that have turned it into real success. What I hear and what you're saying is I love the skill stacking as a distinction, meaning I've never really thought of skill stacking, but that curiosity, like I'm the same, like my whole life, I've just learned, but not learned for the sake of learning like, now let me go apply that to the real world, my playground, and see how it plays out. Ooh, that didn't work. Or, oh, that worked. So that piece and just developing the skills from the learning and getting in there and trialing and erroring and all the things that we do as entrepreneurs. What I'm hearing different about, like again, in the frame of Push Button Podcast, this particular business, yes, there are lots of podcast production agencies out there that will do the work, meaning you record the podcasts and the podcast to us, and we'll do all the show notes, we'll do the editing, we'll do the intros, we'll do the outros, we'll do all the stuff. We'll take all of that task-oriented, systems-oriented, and kind of high-cost stuff off your lap so that you don't have to spend that extra 8 to 10 hours a week doing it. Lots, I'm guessing there's plenty of choices for anybody that does that, you
Absolutely.
included. What I hear different about you, though, is it's not about podcast production.
It
That's
is
just the
not.
means to the end. Your whole mission and vision and passion is not about, hey, let us take 8 hours a week off your plate. It's about, let us help you write better stories. Let us help you be better at business by virtue of not only are we going to take these 8 hours a week off of your lap, but we're going to turn that into content and help you distribute that so that you can get your voice out to more people with a better story. And so it's more when it's the vision, the narrative of the business itself is we help, I don't know, experts build a business to get their voice out and their story, whatever, however you would say that.
We,
That's
we say
different than,
we help heropreneurs wield their story.
yeah. So that's different than we're podcast production agency. So I just see that that's the real value there is just the mechanism we're using to get your story out and your expertise out is this really cool tool called podcast. And we can make your life easier by doing all this piece for you as well. It's
Yeah,
almost like the less
that's
value part of what we do.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And then the distinction that I like to make is, if we get right back into that skill stacking stuff is, our company has a very particular set of skills because we've been doing this whole skill stacking thing for a while, not just me, but my team as well. We have the stuff that goes into the storytelling, but we're playing with all of these tools, right? The AI tools and the app development tools and learning how do we take the stuff that we're doing and take the lever that is your podcast and make it significantly more leveraged. Right. As an example, we've produced a little over 1,200 episodes for clients at this point, which is a lot, right? There's not a lot of podcast agencies who've done that much production, but we have. And so we took all 1,200 of those episodes and then some of the biggest podcasts in the world and started doing some breakdowns on what does it look like to have a persuasive, engaging conversation with a guest, right? Like, is there an actual formula behind it? Turns out there is. And some of the best conversations follow a really consistent structure. And if you've played much with AI, you know that AI is really good at one thing and really bad at another thing. So, like, one of the things that it's really bad at is it's really bad at creativity. Humans are really good at creativity, and robots are really bad at it. But then robots are really, really good at structure. I mean, humans are really bad at structure. So it's like a match made in heaven. And so we can take an AI bot and we've developed it into one of our apps. So our clients, we can take just some really basic data about you, right? So we can take like, hey, your show, this Wealthy Wise podcast that you have, And like, what's your brand tone? And what's your key message that you have for this show? And what is the audience for this show? And like, what's the description of the show? And like, those are some like baseline things for like what the show is. And then we can take a guest, like if you'd got a bio of me ahead of time, like, take my bio for like who I am and what I've done. And we can feed that into the bot. And what it'll give you back is it'll give you back a conversational outline that's designed to both be persuasive, entertaining, and fun that'll really extract and create a great story out of that. And we can do that at volume, like at scale. And to the kind of scale now where like we've got clients that are coming in, and even if you want to do topical based stuff where you can take like, hey, what are the core principles of your business? And we can take those core principles and some of your ideas on them and turn them into a persuasive conversational outline for your podcast. And so we'll get on with our clients now, and in 45 minutes, they'll have 60 outlines. And they're not like cheesy, cheap outlines. It's like, here's the actual hook for your show, like scripted, and here's the questions that you want to ask your guests and follow-up questions for them. And it follows what we call a what, why, how, now structure, right? Here's what we're talking about, here's why it's important, here's how we're going to go through it, and here's story prompts for case study stuff. And we provide those to clients. So it's like, it's high level at every sort of pace of it, from what does the show look like, to what's your branding look like, to what's the actual conversation look like, to what's the distribution plan look like. We follow a 7-day content plan, which is a very particular strategy that we've back-ended on all these things. So it's not just we'll do your content production. That's the baseline. That's like, you know, everyone shows up and does just that. And we're like, okay, so if that's the thing that everyone does, what is like all of the problems that we can solve along the way to take this, this discussion we've been having about skill stacking? How do we take those skills and create an experience and leverage that you just can't get anywhere else? And, I tell people like tell my staff is our goal is to become uncompete withable, right? That's my made up word. And it's just the idea that we're taking these skills and these things that we're putting together and making it so that it's hard to compare us with someone else because we're doing different things in different ways and better ways for our clients. And that's really what entrepreneurship is all about, right? It's taking your business and how do you create something unique, find a group of people who have a problem and create a unique solution for them. And then, get that solution in front of them. And that's the formula for business.
Yeah, well then I noticed that something that's unique about you is that entrepreneurs are creators and risk takers. And like you said, those of us that it's part of our DNA and wiring, and like we can't do anything else.
We
So
can't.
I
It's
mean, all of those
impossible.
things, right? None of us can have a regular job. Like we'll get fired probably in 15 minutes. You probably have lasted longer in an employment situation than most, entrepreneurs I know. But even then, it's like I'm here for a purpose to learn as much as I can. Then as soon as you thought you could extract that, you're out the doors and not seeking that security and high paycheck anymore. You gave it all up to get back
My wife
into
thought I was nuts, by the
belong.
way. I gave up a $130,000 a year position to go back to being an entrepreneur. She was like, "Are you
Exactly, at
dumb?" And I'm
zero.
like,
And
"I'm
then
not. I can't help myself. I have to do this."
you have to do that. And that's just the personality, but you really have this other gift that, one, it's an insatiable desire to learn, like we talked about in Skill Stack. But this other piece, like your mind really does think in structure. So it's this beautiful blend. When you talk about this beautiful blend of AI, like humans are creators and AI is really good at structure. Well, you're really great at structure in its scale, like looking in probably in your
It's
head,
my
like how
zone of
systems
genius.
belong and sequences and in order. And these pieces, wow, this creativity and desire to learn and take in and not be contained by structure. Because a lot of people that think in structure, they're contained to the structure. But it's a very special gift to be able to create, take risk, all the things, and be structured, but not limited by the structure. So
I have a thing because my wife and I have been talking about that for a couple of years. And because I've been trying to, it's a great exercise for anyone to go through, especially entrepreneurs, is to figure out what's your superpower, right? What's the thing that makes you you? Like, and so like that's what we do on our podcast, The Hero Show, is we talk to entrepreneurs. We talk through like their stories if they're comic book superheroes. But it's actually a really useful exercise to figure out what is the thing that you're the best at in the world. And then to build all of your stuff that you do in your business around that superpower. Ignore all your damn weaknesses. I know people tell you to shore up your weaknesses. No, there's people who are good at those. Hire them, right? Hire people for whom that is their superpower to shore up your weaknesses. And then build your business around the things that you're superpowered. And my wife has her degree in early childhood education and psychology. So like that's what her major and minor are in. And so thought she was going to be a counselor. She's not. She's a mom and she loves it and she homeschools all of our kids and she's one of the best people I know. But I remember sitting down with her and being like, I don't know how to think about my skill set. Like what is the thing that I'm really good at? And I score really highly on like, your tests. Like I remember, was it the MFAB or whatever, the military test that they make you take at the end of high school. I scored in like the top 1/10%, got chased around by the Marines and the Army because they wanted me to be in there. I'm in their systems and, scored really high on the SATs and all that, which is fine. Like it's not a big problem for those things. But what I realized was that I don't think the same way a lot of other people do. But I have met other people who think like me. Most of them are entrepreneurs. I was asking my wife and I was like, what is the difference in the people that are in the higher IQ levels? There's obviously a bifurcation of high IQ individuals. And I was like, but I can't really describe what it is and why, like, I know people who are really, really smart. Like my wife, for instance, is a very high IQ individual, but she's not like me at all, right? She doesn't have that weird, insatiable curiosity and the willingness to want to break things and take risks and do all the things that, you and I might do. And so I was asking her about it when we were having this discussion, and she was like, so they actually teach this in early childhood education. She's like, so in your category of high IQ children, they actually break them down into two categories. And so category one is what they call bright children. And then category two, they call gifted children. And both of them are high IQ, 130 plus IQs. But the difference between a bright child and a gifted child is what they do when you ask them a question. Right. So if you ask a bright child, what's 2 plus 2, they'll say 4, right? And you can ask them any number of questions. Like my wife is in that category. Any question you ask her, she immediately has the answer. And 99 times out of 100, it's the right answer and well thought out and really good, right? But it's question answer. If you ask a gifted child the same question, what's 2 plus 2, they're going to respond with more questions, right? 2 plus 2 what? Are we talking like two chickens and two roosters? Because that might equal a whole flock of, chickens, right? Or they might ask things like, well, why are you asking? Like, I don't have enough data to answer that question. And so gifted people are that way. Like, we can't just be satisfied with whatever's on the surface. And so, like, one of my examples that's like, for me, I've been a photographer for 30 years. It's my longest standing hobby. I can't watch a movie the way normal people watch movies. And the reason being is because I don't see the movie the same way other people do, right? Because I'm a storyteller professionally. Like that's what I do as a podcaster is we're professional storytellers. And I'm a photographer. So when I'm watching movies, I'm like paying attention to like, here's the type of lighting that they're using and how that lighting is affecting the mood on the people that are happening and like what that means for, if I was telling the story, here's what it means for whether or not it's foreshadowing or other things. And like, it bothers the hell out of my wife because like, I always know it's going to happen. And I'm like, my son and I, we were watching, he was real interested in Avatar, The Last Airbender. And so we watched the entire series a couple weeks ago. And we got like 3 episodes into the TV show. I was like, oh, so the main character is going to get trained in fire training by this other guy. And he was like, how did you figure that out? And he's like, that doesn't happen until season 3. And I was like, because it's obvious. Like, if you're looking at how they're developing the characters, the story arcs, this story arc's going to go that way, that story arc's going to go this way, this story arc's going to go the other direction. He was like, what? How do you know all of that? And it's just because of that difference, right? We don't answer, we don't get questions and answer them. We ask more questions until you get to the point that we end up with all sorts of crazy ideas.
I love it. Well, what a great conversation. We're kind of bumping up against our time together. And, I just to sum up that stream of consciousness is, that's a benefit of working, with someone like with you, with Push Button Podcasts and you, someone like you, is that it's never going to be status quo. You're always going to be learning, how do we make this better? What's this next skill set? How can we help our clients better? How do we structure better? Because that's just built into you. So it's knowing, like you said, that what makes us uncompetable with is because we're just always going to be up leveling, because that's kind of the nature of who we are,
Yeah.
as opposed to just what we do. So thank you for just being so transparent with you being you today. And that's really what I'm always looking to extract out of these conversations. And this is the Wealthy Wellthy podcast. And the reason why Wealthy Wellthy is because, we're all kind of in this game of money and wealth creation ultimately. But wealthy, Wellthy, is what's underneath it, like this kind of balanced, more of a balanced approach, or like I use the same word, lifestyle architecture. And just how do we design our lives that they're really congruent and aligned with the life that we want, what we care about. And you're just such an example of, building business, making money, working to, for the annual 7-figure mark, which you'll hit soon, and continue to grow and scale and do what you do. But while raising your children and being in a motorhome, an RV, and having these experiences, which that's what's life about. So you really are an exemplification of wealth and for the sake wealth, meaning money, for the sake of wealth, which means a good life. So to kind of wrap us up, I always like to kind of end my podcasts talking about mindset and specifically money mindset. But if you were going to kind of distill it all down, what mindset do you see the world through? And, and what's your money mindset as part of that?
Life worth telling a story about. And that there's a lot of depth there, and we could probably talk for a while about what that means. But most everything you do, and it's like one of my favorite quotes is 20 years from now, you'll regret more of the things you didn't do than the ones you did. So throw off the bow line, sail out of the safe harbor, explore, dream, discover, right? That's Mark Twain. And that is, and there's a couple other things that I tell people all the time is like whenever I'm talking about what I think people should do and how they should think about life, and I said, is live a life worth telling a story about and take the risk that you're worried about, right? The thing that, entrepreneurs and the people who really get the most out of this world, they jump off the cliff and they build the parachute on the way down, right? One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from my dad. And I remember I was 19 years old and I asked him, I was like, how do I know when I'm ready to get married? Right? Because I had a girlfriend at the time and I wanted to marry her and start a family and do all of those kind of things. And he looks at me and he goes, if you wait until you're ready, you'll never do anything. And that really struck me and it stuck with me for all the decisions I've made in the last, 20 years, 20 plus years has been as a result of that one thing he said to me that if you wait until you're ready, you'll never do anything because getting ready means taking the action, doing the things. You'll never be ready until you actually try the things. And whether that's having children or, selling everything you own and moving into an RV and traveling with your kids or quitting a six-figure plus job to go on and start a business or whatever it is that you want to do, like you're never going to be ready for it until you do the things, until you actually take the actions and get the arrows in your back and learn the process. And that's the kind of stuff that makes your life worth telling a story about, right? It's the kind of stuff that gets you invited onto stages and invited onto podcasts and the kind of thing that makes it so that when you show up at a dinner, everyone wants to hear your stories because you're doing something with life. And most people don't. Most people, they just follow a routine and they don't ever do anything. And then their life, as a result, is boring to themselves and to the people around them. And, to your point of being wealthy, right? Like if you want that second wealthy, you have to do something, right? You have to
Right on.
actually take the risks. So my personal quote for myself is live a life worth telling a story about.
I love it. Richard, thank you so much for your time today. I love the conversation. I think you and I could, probably stay on here all day and swap stories and go deeper and deeper. But again, thank you for just revealing so much about business, life, entrepreneurship through the lens of your own story.
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate it.